Hola a todos y bienvenidos una vez más al proyecto Asicom C21 de generación de contenidos de alta calidad que organiza la Asociación Iberoamericana de la Comunicación en colaboración con la Universidad de Oviedo. Es todo un honor para nosotros poder recibir hoy en esta universidad a Robert Krauss, profesor emérito de la Universidad de Columbia y director del Laboratorio de Comunicación Humana de esta universidad. Gracias, Bob, por estar aquí con nosotros y bienvenido. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Bob, naciste en New Jersey. Háblanos un poco de tu infancia. ¿Qué recuerdos tienes de aquella época?
Well, New Jersey is a state that's right across from New York City and has an inferiority complex because of that. And growing up in New Jersey, my eyes were always pointed toward New York. And so I spent most of my childhood thinking about what I would do to get to New York. And it took me quite a while to figure that out.
Bob, y en la adolescencia, la música. Cuéntanos algo de tu banda de jazz.
Well, in the first place, I have to say that this was in the 1940s, 1950s, which I think was the height of jazz music in the United States. And so as a boy, my friends and I would go into New York, we would see Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie, and I remember as a student, we would go to a bar in the village and see Thelonious Monk playing piano. Or when he didn't feel like playing piano, he would dance. So we had these wonderful models, and we played, I played in hotels, we played for weddings and dances, and I played in a few bars as a boy. But one of the things that I've learned was that there were musicians, and then there were good musicians. And I was a musician. And so I learned that much as I loved the music, I was a better listener than I was a player.
Bob, trabajaste en los laboratorios Bell durante años antes de llegar a Columbia. ¿Qué piensas de la investigación aplicada?
Well, I have a very strong feeling about applied research, and I think it doesn't exist. I think the difference between applied research and basic research is not an important difference. There's a difference between good research and bad research. I think that doing research in applied settings is very important, because in the laboratory we can easily create our own world. And that's a world that's perfect and everything is well controlled. But then when we go to the real world, we find it isn't perfect, and we have to learn how to deal with its imperfections. So I think that the ability to do research in applied settings, in real life settings, is very important for a student to master.
Bob, ¿cómo llegas a la Universidad de Columbia y ahora profesor emérito de esta gran institución, de esta gran universidad?
Well, there are two parts to your question. The first part is easy to answer. I got to Columbia through an odd route. I was at Bell Labs. I went from there to Princeton because as much as I loved Bell Labs, which was a wonderful environment, I also enjoyed teaching, and there was no opportunity for that. So I went to Princeton, and then I went to Harvard, and then I went to Rutgers, which is the State University of New Jersey. And then I got a call from Columbia, and they said, would you like to come and give a talk? And I went and gave a talk. And afterward, I found I'd been offered a job. I had no idea. And it had always been my dream to live in New York. And I thought that probably Rutgers was as close as I would ever get, but Columbia made me an offer, and I went there, and I guess I liked it because I stayed for over 30 years. The second question, how it feels to be an emeritus professor, I think you'll have to ask me in 5 years. I'm new to it. I get up in the morning and I realize there is nothing I have to do. I can only do the things that I want to do. And that's very liberating on the one hand, but it's very frightening because you have to then say to yourself, what do I really want to do? And sometimes I don't want to do anything.
Bob, desde tu llegada a Columbia, creaste el Laboratorio de Comunicación Humana. ¿Qué tiene que tener para ti un buen laboratorio? ¿Y cómo nació el laboratorio que diriges?
Well, the laboratory had a natural genesis. It grew out of my research interests and the interests of my students who were working on these problems. And at first it didn't have a name. It was just a collection of offices and laboratories and rooms. And then I remember one of my students said we should have a website, you know. And I said, okay, if you make it, we can have it. And he said, well, what should we call it? And that's when the name was born. I think the ideal lab is one in which everyone feels that they have a contribution to make, and in which everyone feels an investment in getting the answers to some questions. And I've been blessed with students who had the same passion that I did, which was, you know, to find out what the truth is about these phenomena. And I think that's what it takes. I think, you know, I've always said that I've learned much more from my students than they ever learned from me. And I think that's absolutely true. But the one thing I think they did learn from me was to have a serious interest in the outcome of research, you know, to really want to know. That's what research is about. Research is not about asking questions you already know the answer to. And I always tell my students that the data always tells you something, but you've got to be smart enough to figure out what that is. And I think that's what it takes to have a good lab.
Bob, eres ahora presidente honorífico del Laboratorio de Comunicación Humana, el Asicom Lab, que estará hospedado en el campus de Mieres de la Universidad de Oviedo. ¿Qué significa para ti España? ¿Qué recuerdos tienes de España?
It's interesting that I had traveled a fair amount, but not until recently in Spain, and this is my first visit to northern Spain. And I frankly have been surprised to see not only the level of interest, but the level of technological development